Ladies and gentlemen, we have a real treat in store here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, and our guest to kick things off here tonight on Sportnarium Radio. Somebody who's really caught my attention here over the past several weeks. He's an emerging pro wrestling star, and he's gotten a very interesting journey to the professional wrestling world here that we're going to touch upon. He's also been a part of the Nightmare Factory, and the Nightmare Factory is obviously a who's who of people that have been involved in that, including a few people you might have heard of who you can catch on AEW TV regularly on TNT and YouTube, and that's Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall. And he's also done a pretty good job in his own right as a former rugby player. He was a national champion and also even had a tryout with the WWE a few years ago. And we get the first crack at speaking with him. If you heard his name from our Sportnarium Radio website, where our own Tyler Peters of the Rewind Wrestling Podcast had the honor to interview him, now we get to speak to him audio-wise. And without further ado, here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, pro wrestling star, Ishmael Vaughn. My friend.
Hey, Thomas, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on. I'm doing good, and you?
I'm very good, my friend, and it's an honor to speak with you. And I want to recognize Lariette Emery for giving us this opportunity, for allowing us to connect with you and speak with you and get to share your journey. So huge shout out to Lariette. I know we're going to have her on the Music Report here in the next few weeks and talk about her journey. She's got a very good journey that we will get into and here on Sportnarium in the coming weeks. But for you, my friend Ishmael, it's been a tremendous honor to get to know you here off the air over the last few weeks. And for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium, I wanted to ask you in terms of how'd you get involved into professional wrestling?
Yeah, so the way I got involved in professional wrestling is I've always watched it as a little kid, just like many other professional wrestlers. I remember my first time ever watching wrestling. I was a little kid and I would always watch The Simpsons, which would come on maybe like 2 hours before wrestling did. And then wrestling would come on right after The Simpsons, but I wasn't aware that it was wrestling. I would always just turn the TV off and I would wait for South Park to come on at like 11 p.m. And the show that was actually on from 8 to 10 was Friday Night SmackDown. Then at that point in time, I did not know. So I happened to turn on my TV early when I finished playing video games to watch South Park, but it wasn't on yet. And I caught a glimpse of Friday Night SmackDown. And I was just in awe of the characters that I saw on the television. The first characters I ever saw was Undertaker and Randy Orton. That caught my eye, and all the drama and the character work that was involved. I saw and I sat down. I was like, what is this? And it went off, and then South Park came on. I was like, I don't know what I've been missing on these 2 hours of this programming, but I got to catch it next week. So I ended up watching it next week, and I just became involved with it. The storylines were great. The action was great. I became a wrestling fan leading up to WrestleMania 22. So I became very involved in Rey Mysterio's storyline. And ever since then, I watched wrestling religiously. I didn't have cable, so I wasn't able to watch Monday Night Raw. The only one I was able to get was Friday Night SmackDown, but I would watch it every Friday night from 8 to 10 religiously on TV. So that's how I originally got into it, is I just happened to stumble upon it waiting to watch South Park, which, by the way, I was not supposed to be watching. My mom did not know I was watching South Park as a middle schooler.
Listen, man, that makes two of us, because when I was growing up in Brooklyn, and I remember my 7th and 8th grade, all we did was at 10:30, or you mentioned it after SmackDown, we would watch South Park. So that makes two of us, and that was two of us that weren't supposed to be watching South Park. But you went on to do bigger and better things, obviously, in the professional wrestling world. And we'll get into your story on how you got into the business here in a second. But you said something interesting, and I want to go back to that in terms of some of your favorite wrestlers growing up, and in terms of who you are as a person. I mean, how much did they impact you on your growing up and eventually becoming a professional wrestler?
Yeah, most definitely. So my two favorite wrestlers of all time will be John Cena and Rey Mysterio for two different reasons. They're completely different wrestlers when you look at them, both personality-wise and wrestling style-wise, but they both carry what I value. Rey Mysterio always had the underdog story. He always was coming up as the underdog, having to fight his way to the world championship picture. And that's when I really started watching wrestling, was around WrestleMania 22. And he had to face Kurt Angle and Randy Orton in the triple threat. And he was seen as the underdog. For me, I was able to relate for that. Coming up as a kid, African-American in East Oakland, a very poor community, I was already seen as an underdog coming up in life. So I could connect my story to Rey Mysterio's story. And that's what drew me to him, his underdog story. As far as John Cena went, I always admired the three things he always said, which was hustle, loyalty, and respect. And that was something that I really founded myself on when I started going through school and when I started playing sports. I was like, if I want to make it in life, I got to do what John Cena says. I got to hustle, show loyalty, and have respect. And that was something that was very taught in my household by my mother, growing up in a single parent household. So those were the two reasons why I was very attracted to John Cena and Rey Mysterio. Two different reasons, but they both carried high values that I appreciated.
Let me ask you a question, Ishmael, because you said something interesting on Rey Mysterio, and I want to go back to it because obviously when you think of Rey Mysterio, you think of San Diego, right? And you're from Oakland. And geographically, when you think about wrestlers that come from California or certainly in places like Oakland or San Francisco or San Diego, I know geographically there's a little bit of a difference, but did that also play into it when you watched Rey Mysterio and saying, hey, you know what? He's from where I'm from, or region-wise, he's kind of where I'm from. Did that play a factor or a role into why you looked up to him because of just he grew up in an area that you could identify and say, you know what? If Rey could do it, I could do it.
Yeah, most definitely. Watching wrestling, I didn't hear too many wrestlers because, they always announce their hometowns, their height, and their weight. You don't really hear, at least back then I didn't pay attention too much, but I never really heard from California. But with Rey Mysterio, you'll always hear from San Diego, California. So I was like, oh, a wrestler from California. So it did make me a lot more drawn to him and easier to just connect with because he came from the same area I did. Obviously, San Diego's further south than Oakland, but it's still in the same state.
That's something also interesting, and I know it's a little off topic, but I wanted to ask your perspective on it because I'm from New York City and I grew up in Brooklyn. And you think about the Northeast, or at least in Brooklyn or in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, you get a lot of guys who came up from here. Obviously, you think of Taz, you think about Tommy Dreamer, the Dudley Boys, a lot of the ECW wrestlers, even a Kurt Angle is from Pennsylvania. But California, I would think naturally, Ishmael would have a long list of people that have come from, whether it's the Bay Area, Orange County, but yet you said something that I didn't even realize. And now I'm trying to think about it, but there hasn't been as many wrestlers that necessarily come from the Golden State versus, let's say, where I'm from. Why do you think that is?
That's a very good question because it surprises me as well. You would think with how large California is, we have Hollywood, we have San Francisco, the Bay Area, we have a lot of characters in California. So it does surprise me that there's not more wrestlers breaking into the scene from California. But I feel like the reason why is I've seen wrestling, from my experience being in the wrestling world so far, I feel like most wrestling is more dominant on the East Coast than it is the West Coast. We have promotions out here and we have wrestlers out here, but every single time I talk to a wrestler, they always tell me, oh, you need to go to the East Coast. You need to wrestle on the East Coast. That's where wrestling is. Yeah, you'll have some wrestling on the West Coast, but it's more dominant on the East Coast. But it really does surprise me that California doesn't breed more wrestlers because of how large our state is. So that is a good question that I'm wondering myself. I honestly couldn't answer you why we don't have more wrestlers. I mean, we have the people out here, but I guess the wrestling scene just isn't as predominant out here as it is on the East Coast.
Because I'm thinking about it now, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Sting was from California, but I think he was, like you said, further south. I want to say Sting would come to mind, but anybody else, and I'm not counting Hollywood Hulk Hogan, where they would say he was from Venice Beach, when we really know he had kind of like a quasi-Southern accent. And The Rock doesn't count either, because we know The Rock obviously moved around, even though The Rock is pretty much Hollywood at this point. But yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, I'm from Brooklyn and I live in Staten Island now in New York. And obviously, there's so many people that I even know that at least got a tryout or went to the WWE, or at least people that you're familiar with that you've seen in the street, and they know somebody who at least got into the business or tried. And certainly even we do a lot of work with a lot of different wrestling companies. And now I'm thinking about it, Ishmael, it's most of them are based in the Northeast. We have a few in Florida. Florida's become a hotbed, but that's why we're going to try to definitely break the cycle here and speak with you, my friend. We're very honored to have you on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show that is emerging pro wrestling star, Ishmael Vaughn. And of course, Ishmael Vaughn is doing a phenomenal job, and he just recently had his first match. He's also been a part of the Nightmare Academy and doing a phenomenal job there at the Nightmare Factory with the likes of QT Marshall and Cody Rhodes, and a lot of emerging talent that's coming out of there. So I want to make sure we recognize them and also recognize all the great things that Ishmael is doing. And I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportnarium Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryson. Ishmael, I know that growing up in California, you were also very successful in multiple sports. And for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium, I was curious about some of your successes when it came to the world of the gridiron, and also later on in college when it came to rugby.
Yeah, so I started playing football actually in high school. Most people who play football, they usually start off in Pop Warner middle school and come up through there. I never touched football until high school. And the funny reason is, the only reason I decided to play football in high school was because I thought that's what the cool kids do. That's how you get popular, is you join the football team and you play football. That was my initial reason for joining the team. That reason didn't last very long. I ended up playing football all 4 years that I was in high school, but I played it for the love of the game. I fell in love with the game for what it was and not for popularity fast track. Playing football at Oakland High School, it was very fun. However, my team did struggle because of the GPA. I'm gonna be honest. A lot of our student athletes did not have the GPA to play. So oftentimes we would field a very small team. It would be a struggle because a lot of players would have to play both ways and play special teams. I was one of those players. I never got off the field. Was it fun to constantly play? Yes, it was, but it was very tiring and very hard. We would often show up to games with maybe like just enough to fill the roster, with maybe like 5 extras. And we would be playing teams that would have maybe like 40, 50, 60 players ready to go. So it was very rough in high school playing football because we were constantly getting pounded just because we didn't have guys to rotate out. Other schools, they had players who would just play offense only, defense only, special teams. So they got their breaks, they got their rotations. For us, we had to grind it out. But my experience playing football at Oakland High, I wouldn't change anything. I enjoyed my teammates, and my coaches were the best. They were the ones who convinced me to pursue collegiate athletics. My coaches were like, hey, Ish, you got the look, you got the talent, the ability. You should definitely consider playing football at the next level. And they definitely helped make me the person I am today. A lot of my coaches in high school went out of their way to help me, whether it was with school, whether it was giving me a ride home after practice because my mom couldn't pick me up. So I would say playing football is not just for the sport of it, but also being able to build the character and being able to become a better person, a better man, and having respect for your fellow teammates as well. And I went on to collegiate football. I didn't play too long at the collegiate level for football. I ended up joining the rugby team. That's where I found most of my collegiate success. My rugby team, we won 2 consecutive national championships in a row in 2015 and 2016. We went to a third in 2017. We did not win the third in 2017, but we did win 2 consecutive in 2015 and 2016. And making that transition from football to rugby was actually a lot harder than you would think, because in the world of rugby, the game does not stop. It's like soccer and football put together. The clock keeps going and you keep playing both defense and offense, and it never stops. Versus in football, when the clock does stop, you get a chance to take a break, catch your breath for a couple of seconds, and then the next play resumes. In rugby, I say it's more of a team game in that you have a responsibility for everything on the field. Everyone shares the same responsibility, whether it's running the ball, whether it's tackling the ball character or carrier, or joining in on the ruck and scrums. So you really get a chance to just feel the difference between the two sports.
You said a couple of things interesting, and I want to get your perspective on it because it's a very unique perspective, and especially for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium. And obviously, we are a UK-based radio station, so we do have some listeners out there and some supporters who are very familiar with the game of rugby. And Ishmael, I've always felt that the game of rugby is one of the most intense sports that you can play, and I've always had a tremendous amount of respect and an appreciation for anybody who picks up that sport. I mean, Ishmael, I think it's even more difficult to play rugby than to play football. I mean, how did those experiences, and especially the experience of playing rugby, maybe shape you into your career now as a professional wrestler?
Yeah, definitely. So you're right. Rugby is a lot more difficult than football. You play both ways. You don't stop. There's more teamwork involved. Everyone passes, everyone runs, but it builds your character and it builds tough skin, because in football, we wear pads. So when you tackle in football, football is kind of more out there in terms of tackling. You can shoulder tackle, you can tackle properly. But in the game of rugby, you have to tackle the proper way. And it really teaches you how to focus and make plays and be there when you need to be and keep yourself safe and keep your opponent safe as well. Because obviously in the game of rugby, everyone wants to win just like in football, but we don't want to hurt each other. It's the same way in wrestling. We want to keep each other safe. We want to work together well, but we also want to make those tackles mean something. And vice versa for wrestling, you want to make those moves mean something. So making that transition from rugby to professional wrestling wasn't quite hard, because if you think about it, it's the exact same thing, only you're just wrestling instead of doing rugby. You're working together and you're being safe with each other at the exact same time while having a good time out there.
Oh, I'm sure you definitely had a good time, and we'll get into those national championships that you won at UC Davis. And I want to ask you then this question, because I'm sure you get it a lot now that you're a professional wrestler, and you were somebody that had a lot of success on the gridiron and also as a rugby player. And you notice it now over the past several years that a lot of incoming professional wrestlers have a background in competitive athletics at a college level or even a professional level. You look at WWE and certainly AEW, and a large pool of those wrestlers that are incoming have had backgrounds in collegiate or professional athletics. You think about 15 or 20 years ago even, and that pool of professional athletes, it was very minimal. I mean, you think about, I guess you could say Brock Lesnar, I guess you could say Kurt Angle, because they competed at that level, or Mark Henry would be another name. But, you really didn't have too many professional or college athletes. I mean, Steve Mongo McMichael might have been the most well-known in WCW in the mid-90s. But why do you think now, Ishmael, over the past, let's say, 7 to 8 years, that the WWE and AEW now look for athletes like yourself who competed, had that success, and now are looking at careers in professional wrestling? Do you think it's a coordinated thing, or it's just there's a certain element that you guys have as collegiate athletes or professional athletes that professional wrestling companies are looking for?
Yeah, definitely. I really do think it comes down to what collegiate athletes carry and what they have to offer. Being in the WWE or being in AEW, being signed to either one of those promotions, you do have to carry some degree of athleticism based on what we do for a living. And collegiate athletes, they carry that, whether you're a basketball player, football player, soccer player, whatever you did, or if you did it at the professional level, you already have some level of athleticism. But I think more important than anything else is that level of discipline and that level of focus that collegiate and professional athletes already have, that WWE doesn't really have to teach you or like instill within you. It's already in you when you come there, and they're hoping that you can translate it over to wrestling. The same work ethic and the same degree of work that you put into learning your previous sport, whether it was rugby, football, basketball, whatever it may be, they're hoping that you put that into professional wrestling and that they don't have to teach you that. It's a lot easier to make that transition because you've already been doing sports your whole entire life. You're just learning how to do something a little bit different now. So I feel like collegiate and professional athletes are a little bit more attractive to professional wrestling companies these days because it's an easier transition for both parties, not just one.
Yeah, because I would kind of think, and I know this for a fact, and I'm not a professional wrestler, but you obviously are a professional wrestler. But I've spoken with enough professional wrestlers over the past 6 or 7 months on Sportnarium Radio here to get a sense that training for being a professional wrestler is far more difficult than becoming, let's say, a rugby player like you were, or a football player like you were, because you have to do certain things that you could practice over and over and just not get it. I mean, there are stories of a lot of professional athletes who don't last in the world of professional wrestling. I mean, you look at Daniel Puder was an example. He was a great shoot fighter, but for whatever reason, going back to that ruthless aggression era that you kind of mentioned there, I mean, he didn't last very long. I mean, there are stories of professional athletes that don't last too long in this. And I was curious then, since now that you are a professional wrestler and you were just coming off a successful career, and especially in the rugby world, I mean, compare for me, for our worldwide audience on Sportnarium, in terms of training now to be a wrestler versus, let's say, rugby. And do you see similarities? I know you kind of touched upon a few, but do you think it's more difficult, let's say, to become a professional wrestler versus, let's say, becoming a rugby player?
I would say, yes, it is more difficult to become a professional wrestler than a rugby player. In rugby, when I played on my collegiate team, rugby is a unified sport. You just have to learn your position and learn what your responsibilities are, and then learn the overall team responsibilities and how to play the game. In the world of professional wrestling, it takes a lot more grit. Our bodies do a lot of unnatural things. Like most people don't get slammed on the ground maybe 20 times a week for a living. It's not natural for your, like, just one basic example is just learning how to take a back bump in professional wrestling. Your body is naturally not just going to throw itself on the ground. It's such an unnatural thing to do. So what we do, you have to really get outside of your comfort zone. It's just the most simplest things that make professional wrestling hard. We make it look easy because we've been doing it for a long time. We've been training to do it, but taking bumps is harder than it looks. Running ropes is a lot harder than it looks. I remember the first time I ever had to run ropes, it was at my WWE tryout. And I'm like, how hard can it be to run ropes? You just hit the ropes and you run to the other one. But it's a lot harder than it looks. Also, if your back is not used to hitting ropes, it hurts. It's uncomfortable. So it's a lot harder than what people think. So training to become a professional wrestler, it takes a lot of grit. It takes a strong mindset. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. People say, oh, you can become a professional wrestler within a month. No, you can't. It takes a lot of training. And a lot of people aren't willing to put in the work. It's hard. It's unnatural. Your bodies get beat up every single night. It's just as mentally taxing as it is physical. And a lot of people don't have the will and grit to go through all that. So it is definitely harder, in my opinion.
I kind of think, Ishmael, it's almost like all in one becoming a professional athlete, actor, and a stunt person, because you have to learn how to fall, right? You have to learn how to fall properly. Then you have to learn to be able to speak and connect with the audience, and then learn to be able to keep your opponent safe, right? Your participant that's also involved in the match. Then you have to be able to do all these different moves that you guys do. That's why I always say, when people say, wrestling is fake, it's entertainment, I go, no. I mean, if you watch what you guys do each and every night, and we've gotten the opportunity again to speak with a countless amount of wrestlers over the past several months, and I would argue it's one of the toughest things any could do, and you've had a lot of success. And we'll get to that WWE tryout in a little while, because I know that our worldwide audience listening here on Sport Names going to be very curious about that. But I wanted to know what it felt like in winning back-to-back national championships at UC Davis for rugby.
It was such an accomplishment. My rugby team, we worked very hard for those 3 years. We were originally at the D1A level. We dropped down because we just weren't succeeding at the D1A level. So we wanted to take it back a notch and see, okay, let's see if we could rebuild our program at the D1AA level. And a lot of people doubted us going into that first year at the D1AA level. And we went undefeated for 2 years. I've only lost 2 rugby games in my whole entire career. Our first year, we went undefeated. We won the national championship against Central Florida, having the opportunity to go out there and play them as defending national champions. And winning the title meant a lot. I believe the final score of that game was 18-15. We made a second half comeback. We were getting beaten in the first half pretty badly, but our team just rallied back. We played good defense. We never gave up, played to the final whistle, and we ended up winning in the final moments of the game. And it was so rewarding because we had a lot of critics coming into that season, a lot. People were like, oh, UC Davis, yeah, they might be undefeated now, but once they get to playoffs, they're going to be first round eliminations. We were not first round eliminations. We actually blew out the first playoff round, and then we ended up winning the second. We went to the national championship, and that's where we got a really lot of doubt. Like, oh, UC Davis is on this lucky streak. Central Florida, they're defending national champions. There's no way they're losing. They're going for their third title in a row, and we ended up winning 18-15 in the final moment. So that was very rewarding. Second year, very similar. We also went undefeated. No way UC Davis rugby is going to repeat. Last year was a fluke, et cetera, et cetera. They're not going to beat Notre Dame. We ended up beating Notre Dame College, not the Notre Dame, but Notre Dame College. And it was a very fun game because I remember it ended up raining that game, and it was very muddy, very wet, but we won our consecutive national championship. And it was just rewarding just to prove critics wrong. You always want to prove somebody wrong when they doubt you. And I feel like my team, we went out there, we put in the work, we practiced hard, we played hard, and the results came through.
Oh, they certainly came through. And this is reasons why we're extremely honored to have here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show that is pro wrestling star Ishmael Vaughn. And of course, you can follow him on Twitter at HRLIHINAGTAM and find out why he has quickly become one of our favorite wrestlers around. And he's also on Instagram as well, where you can catch him and keep up to date with all the great things that he continues to do. And we have a very good feeling that he's going to be somebody that you're going to remember for a very long time. And you can also catch him on Instagram at The Independent Variable. So this one you made easy for us. You made easy for this one when it comes to following you on Instagram at The Independent Variable and find out why he's somebody that is going to go into the future as somebody you're going to remember. And I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportnarium Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryson. You can follow us here on Sportnarium on Twitter at Sportnarium WW. You can like us on Facebook at Sportnarium Radio. You can follow us on Instagram at Sportnarium. And of course, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You can listen to us on SportnariumRadio.com, and you can catch the Sports Report from Friday to Sunday, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We're also on live now at various times, including 10 p.m. Fridays, 10 p.m. Saturdays, and 5 o'clock Sunday nights. So we go uncut, unfiltered, unedited. We want to make sure everybody tunes into that. We've also had our most successful day on last week's show. We had several hundred listeners tuned into us on the radio, so we're very happy to continue to rebuild the station. I want to acknowledge, obviously, my co-leader, Dave Whitmore, on Sportnarium. Also want to acknowledge Tyler Peters, who I know wrote an article about you, Ishmael, and all the great things that you're doing. And also want to acknowledge the Santino brothers, who I know who trained you over at the academy there. And of course, the Nightmare Factory and everybody else that has made you the person that you are today. And we are talking all things related to the career of Ishmael Vaughn, pro wrestling star, well on his way to bigger and better things. And Ishmael, for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium, I know you talked about California, but I know also in your background that you were born in Cameroon. And I got to ask you, because obviously I haven't been to Cameroon, and frankly, I haven't even been to California. So there's a lot of places that I need to go on my bucket list, but unfortunately we are in COVID. So who knows what's going to go on right now at the present day. But I did want to ask for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium, since we do have several listeners out there in many countries, talk to me about being born in Cameroon and what does that country mean to you in terms of the person you are today?
Yeah, most definitely. So my story with Cameroon begins with my mom, actually. My mom was a missionary for our church. She met my dad in Cameroon, and that's where they got married, and that's where I was born. I was only in Cameroon for 3 months after my birth before I came back to the United States. I didn't get my first opportunity to visit Cameroon until I was 16 years old in high school as a junior, and I went there to visit my dad. So my dad and my mom ended up splitting up. My dad stayed in Cameroon, and my mom came back to America with me. At this point in my life, I had never met my dad in person, never seen him. So that was the purpose of the trip, was to meet my dad first time in Cameroon. I went with my uncle, who I met up with in Germany first, and then I flew with him and his family to Cameroon. And Cameroon, it was quite an experience. It was really great to see my dad's side of the family. But as you hear, parts of Africa are considered a third world country. And I feel like people don't really know what a third world country is until you've actually seen, visit, or been to one. And for me, I always heard, yes, Cameroon is a third world country, and I know what that means, but I really found that out first time that when I went there. I just remember visiting. It was nice to see family and everything, but I just remember visiting, and I was walking down the streets with my uncle. We were going to some marketplace, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I just remember pretty vividly the streets were all torn up, like non-drivable. You cannot drive on those streets. There was a lot of marketplaces that were very underprivileged marketplaces, places where you would look at them and you just couldn't believe it coming from a place like America. I was privileged to grow up in the United States my whole entire life, and just seeing what I saw out there, it really made my heart hurt, because I was like, these are my people. This is where I was born. This is where I come from. This could have easily have been me growing up. And it was just really heartbreaking to see it. The condition of the country, the condition of some of the animals out there. I will never forget this image. My uncle and I and his family, we stayed at a church while we were out there. That's where we were living for the month that we were in Cameroon. And I remember they had dogs on the property that were inside a fence, and the dogs were in terrible condition. I remember there was just fleas all around them. Parts of their ears were missing. Parts of their flesh were missing. I just could not believe what I was seeing. And it really made my heart hurt when I went out there, because I was like, this is where my family is, and this is where I'm from. So going out there, it was to visit my dad for the very first time and meet him in person. But I also felt like it was fate for me to return to Cameroon and see what I saw, because it really makes me want to go out there one day and help in any way I can. Right now, I'm in no position to help, but one day when I am, that's something that I want to do and be a project in my life. It's just to go back in my country and help out any way I can, because I feel like nobody in the world should have to live the way I see some of the people in Cameroon living. And that's something that I really just want to go back and help with. Now, when I was in Cameroon, the main thing to do was to see my dad for the very first time. So it was just an emotional trip all around, seeing the condition of Cameroon, seeing my dad for the first time and just talking to him and figuring out why he wasn't in my life. It was just emotional all around. But I'm glad that I had the opportunity to go and visit Cameroon, see it for myself, see my dad for the very first time, and just feel like there's another purpose to my life. And that's just to help out Cameroon and come back and give back to the community that I was born in, and don't forget about them.
It reminds me, and I don't know if you remember him or not, but it was a player that was very famous in the NBA. He was arguably one of the greatest centers of the 1990s and arguably all time. And that's Dikembe Mutombo. And he was from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he would go there. In fact, NBA Inside Stuff, this is way back in the late 90s, I want to say. I was a kid, and they actually showed him every summer. He would go back to Africa and try to help in terms of giving humanitarian relief and money. And he brought with him a few other NBA players. I think Patrick Ewing came with him, who was famously with the Knicks one year. And it makes you put life into perspective. And we have all the freedoms that we have here in America. And I know it's been a very difficult time with COVID. And in some parts of the country, we've certainly had our freedoms taken away. But compared to, let's say, places like Cameroon, I mean, it's still a drop in the bucket. And then when it comes to the name Ishmael Vaughn, every name has a meaning, right? And obviously yours has a meaning that is probably a lot different. I think it's safe to say, right? Versus, let's say, The Rocks or Stone Cold Steve Austin or even a Rey Mysterio or Samoa Joe, who I just reminded me, actually, he's from California as well. So we got to give Samoa Joe at least a rub because he's from California as well. I've been reminded by the crack staff. So I have to include Samoa Joe as one wrestler we can put on that list. But the name Ishmael Vaughn, for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium, what does that name mean to you, and especially for your career upcoming, and maybe where we can use this name to certainly help some of the people out there in Cameroon?
Yeah, the name Ishmael Vaughn. So the way I chose my ring name, Ishmael, the first part of it is actually based off my real life nickname, which is Ish. People call me Ish as a nickname. The way I got the nickname Ish was actually very funny. So my real name is Vaughn Roscoe Lehinagtam, and it's a very, very difficult and hard name to pronounce. So I went to boarding school I was in boarding school for about 2 years before I transferred to Oakland High School. And when I transferred to Oakland High School, I joined the football team over there. And at the end of my very first practice, they had me stand up and introduce myself. So I introduced myself as Hyowan, very hard name to pronounce. No one on the football team could say it to save their lives. They kept asking me over and over again, what's your name again? And then finally, at the very end of that practice, someone stood up and was like, you know what? We're just going to call you Ish. And everyone was like, yeah, let's just call him Ish. And Ish it was. I wasn't going to argue with the football team that I was brand new to. I was like, whatever, they'll learn my real name eventually. Obviously, they never learned my real name. So Ish was what I went by pretty much throughout my whole football career in high school. And pretty much it kind of caught wind to the rest of the high school. So everyone just started calling me Ish. And then eventually it grew on me. I remember when my coach was talking to the UC Davis head football coach when I was getting ready to go play for their program. They were like, oh yeah, by the way, what is Ish's real name? Because they needed it for whatever reason. And he was like, you know what? I actually do not know his real name. I'm going to have to go ask him. So Ish really stuck on me. It followed me from high school to college to grad school to now professional wrestling. So it really just stuck on me and it grew on me and it became something that I was like, yeah, you know what? Ish is a part of me now. So I decided to lengthen it out and say Ishmael. That was the first part of it. It came from my nickname. Now, the last name Vaughn, that one does have significant meaning to me. And the reason why is my best friend in college, his name is Kyle Devon. I played football with him in college for a bit. His last name is Devon. So I moved in with him after my grad school career down here in Los Angeles. His parents allowed me to move into their house. They've been allowing me to stay here rent-free for like the past 2.5, going on 3 years, because they know I'm down here to pursue my dream of professional wrestling when I started training at Santino Bros. And to be real honest, without them, I would not have been able to do this journey. I would not have been able to survive out here in Los Angeles by myself as long as I have if it wasn't for them allowing me into their home out of the goodness of their heart, allowing me to stay here rent free and just help around the house. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be able to do anything that I'm doing right now. So as a tribute to them and as an honor to them, because none of this would be possible if it wasn't for their help, I decided to take part of their last name, Vaughn, and add it to my ring name. And that's how I got my ring name, is Ishmael Vaughn. And the Vaughn comes from their last name.
We got to give them a huge shout out because, listen, we wouldn't be speaking, Frank. I know we shouted out Lariat, but if it wasn't for them, I mean, we wouldn't be talking with you, right? We wouldn't see you on the verge of being a pro wrestler.
You probably would not.
No, that's why we got to give them a huge shout out and make sure that they get recognized here in the air. And Ishmael, you're a big guy. And originally, I thought you were like Greg Vaughn's son, the ex-San Diego Padre. Here I am thinking that you're the son of Greg Vaughn because you guys are both big guys. You're both a fearsome guys. And I know we were talking about this off air. And one of the first things I asked you, I'm like, let me ask you a question. Are you related to 50 home run guy from the Padres from that 98 World Series team, Greg Vaughn? You kind of chuckled. You go, no, I get that all the time, but we're not related. So obviously I could see why that we're not related between you and Greg Vaughn. But let me ask you the question now, transitioning into the wrestling world, because we touched upon obviously the success that you had with the rugby. We talk about the success that you had in terms of the football field. We talked a little bit about your background in terms of growing up, but for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarium, and I know you mentioned it very briefly, but talk to me about that experience that leads you to get that tryout at the Performance Center for the WWE in 2018.
Yeah, so the way I got that tryout, if I'm gonna be honest, was just dumb luck. So what happened is I was meeting up with my cousin. Yeah, it was literally dumb luck. But I was meeting up with my cousin Simone, who I'm very close with, and she was just asking me what my plans were after graduate school. And I was telling her about my dreams of going into professional wrestling, and I told her that I wanted to start training for it and eventually get a WWE tryout one day. And just to say that I did it and that I did not give up on my dreams. Like if people ever ask me, did you follow your dreams? Like, hey, yeah, I got a WWE tryout. I made it. I didn't make it. I never wanted to say that I did not try to achieve my dreams. So I was basically just telling her that that was my goal after grad school, is just to see if I can make it. And if I make it, I make it. If I don't, I don't. At least I can say I tried. Now I'm looking back on that. Then that was a huge lie because obviously I didn't make it and I'm still trying. But my cousin Simone, she took that to heart and she did a lot of research and a lot of digging for me. And she found Ken Siemens' email. I don't know how she ended up finding his email, but my cousin's a recruiter, so she's pretty good at finding who she wants to find. And she found Ken Siemens' email and she shot him an email, just a general email, like, hey, I know somebody who might be really good for you guys. He's a huge wrestling fan, former rugby player. She listed all my collegiate stats. If you ever want to give him a look, just email me back. And surprisingly, he emailed her back and was like, hey, yeah, we were actually looking for someone about his size, his build, and just send us pictures of him, his build, his height, his weight, more about his athletic background. And she was like, sure. She translated that information onto me. I got on it immediately. At first, I thought she was pulling my leg. I thought she was messing with me. And then I actually, because back then I didn't know who Ken Seaman was. Obviously, he's the director of talent relations, the VP for WWE. But I had to Google it. I was like, oh, she's serious. She actually found somebody. So I got on top of that right away and sent them that information. In that meantime, I continued my training, just assuming I was going to get the tryout, hoping for the best. Because if you do get the tryout, you want to come prepared in the best shape that you could. So I just continued my training. I didn't receive a response back from Ken Seaman until maybe, I want to say, 3 months after I sent him all the information that he asked for. And the email back saying was, congratulations, you have been invited to the next WWE tryout, which will be held in February 2018. And then it just listed everything that they needed from us and everything that we were expected to bring and expected to be prepared for. So I started training for that intensely. I had 6 months to prepare for that tryout. I flew out there in February 2018 and I had the opportunity to meet up with a couple of cool people at my tryout. We were all broken up into groups. So the groups of guys that I was with, I actually was with Austin Theory, who's currently in WWE, and Mantel Moonshine, who actually just recently appeared on AEW Dark. So those are two guys that I had the opportunity to be in a group with while I was at my WWE tryout. And just learning from them and their experience as workers in the industry already, because I had zero experience, was very helpful. Now, during the 3-day tryout, it was pretty intense. It was only 3 days, but we were there from pretty much, I want to say, 8 to 9 a.m. in the morning. And we didn't leave the Performance Center until maybe about 5 or 6 p.m. at night. So it was very long days. They kind of pulled a fast one on us. We were supposed to do our promos. So one day is dedicated toward the promos. We were supposed to do it on the 3rd day of the tryout. So the very last day. They pulled a fast one on us and emailed us the day before and was like, hey guys, change of plans. We're actually doing promos the very first day. So we did promos the first day, and I was very proud of my promo. I wasn't a worker yet, and I hadn't been on a wrestling scene yet. So I went up there as myself and just introduced myself the best way possible, told them what I was about, told them my story, where I come from, and what I want to do in the wrestling industry one day. And then after that, the rest of the tryout was pretty much physical from that point on. We did a lot of in-ring training, things that I hadn't done yet. We did rolls, we did running the ropes, we did different wrestling cardio drills, the Brookside shuffles. Those were one of my favorites. Those were tough, but they were fun to do. And the coaches were very encouraging. A lot of people there, including myself, did not have wrestling experience. So I was going through it for the first time with other people. But I remember going through the WWE tryout. It was very fun. You had the opportunity to meet different coaches. The Iconics were there. They helped out with our tryout. Lacey Evans was there. She helped out as well. And just getting the knowledge from them and having them tell us what we should work on each and every single day at the tryout to make ourselves stand out. It didn't really hit too well for me back then because I was just so new to everything and I was taking everything in. But looking back on it, I was like, oh yeah, that's what she meant. Oh yeah, I should probably do that next time. So it was a very fun experience and I was just grateful for the opportunity.
I have this 3-day tryout back in 2018. It's a little over 3 years ago now. And you were one of the people that gets this tryout, and you were amongst a list of a lot of talent like yourself in terms of the backgrounds that you had. So that's a tremendous achievement, regardless of what happens for the rest of your career, to be at the Performance Center. But what happens in your career that you have this 3-day tryout? Take me back to that. What happens on your journey now after that 3-day tryout ends and you're no longer in the Performance Center? So talk to me about what happens after that in terms of where we are to have gotten you to the place you're in now with your career.
Yeah. So after that 3-day tryout, they told us that they would get back to us maybe within a few weeks on the results of the tryout. We ended up getting the results back. I got an email from one of their recruiters. His name was Paul Fair. Paul Fair emailed me back and was like, hey, Ish, we really appreciated your hard work. You came in shape. You had really good promos and a good work ethic. But right now we think your wrestling abilities are a little bit raw and need improvement. So I took that as constructive criticism. And I was like, hey, Paul, thanks for emailing me back. I really do appreciate it. I took advantage of the opportunity to be able to talk to him. And I was like, I want to hear it from your mouth. Since you guys work for WWE, what is the best place in the world to train outside of the Performance Center? And he told me Santino Bros Wrestling Academy in Los Angeles. So after that, I was like, okay, say less. As soon as I graduate from Berkeley, I will be on my way down there. So I did that tryout in the middle of my grad school career. So I had to wait another year before I could move to LA and pursue that. I did want to finish my master's. I had already started. I was like, you might as well finish. So I finished, and literally the day after my graduation, my friend Kyle Vaughn, who I mentioned earlier, he came up for my graduation. The next day we drove back down to Los Angeles and I started Santino Bros Wrestling Academy about a month later.
So you're in the Santino Bros in the academy, and you mentioned Paul Fair. Talk to me now about the experience in the Santino Bros Academy, what that was like, and how has that helped you get to where you've been?
That school is tough as hell. I'm just going to say that right now. Anyone who is thinking about going to Santino Bros, I implore you, come in shape, which I did. I came in shape, but I saw what happened to my peers who did not come in shape. They probably had the worst day of their lives. I remember my very first day at Santino Bros, I worked out before that training session because I was like, oh, it's the first day. Like, what are they going to do to us? It's just going to be like orientation. This is how the course is going to go, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, it's not going to be anything intense. Luckily, I'm in really good shape and I survived. But oh boy, was I wrong. That was a long day for a lot of people. Man, that school's tough. It's a lot of cardio conditioning. So the way the classes are structured, it's 2 hours. In the beginning, you do a lot of cardio wrestling drills, whether you're running spots, whether you're running the ropes, whether you're doing rolls, whether you're taking bumps, whether you're doing push-ups or sit-ups on the outside of the ring. The first hour is very cardio intensive. And if you don't come in shape, you're going to have a bad time. As they say on South Park, you're going to have a bad time. So a lot of people have a bad time, but the second hour of the course is more instructive. So Santino Bros, their wrestling program is a year long. Most wrestling programs that you find out there maximally train you about 3 months before they put you out into the wrestling world. Santino Bros goes a year. So with that, you have a lot of time to really focus on the art and the craft of professional wrestling, really learning how to perfect the moves, really learning how to perfect spots. Santino Bros, we do a lot of working on the fly, which is just calling it in the ring, not planning anything out beforehand. And at first, I hated it. I hated working on the fly because I'm like, I have no idea what we're supposed to be doing right now. I have no idea what my opponent's thinking. But as you work on the fly and you do it more regularly, it becomes more natural. You know how to settle down into things. You know how to call things, work with your opponent. And I feel like Santino Bros, they really teach you the art of professional wrestling. And since their program is a year, they have more time to really work on it and perfect that craft with you. So it's a tough school, but I feel like if you're serious about being a professional wrestler and you're within the state of California, you need to go to Santino Bros. They will really teach you how to wrestle. And if you're not in shape, you're going to get in shape real quick.
Something interesting, and I almost have to ask you this question before I get to the Nightmare Factory and that experience. I know a lot of people listening to this are going to probably want to know your experiences on a Cody Rhodes and a QT Marshall especially, but I would have to think it's almost urgent to be in shape as a professional wrestler because, you think about it, right? You were an athlete. You played rugby and you played football. And you see it a lot of times in sports that you guys have an off season. You guys, you don't work out as much or you're not in game condition and you get 3 or 4 months, let's say, as an average of a break. And guys come, whether it's a spring training or whether it's a training camp like you have in football, and you see it all the time. It takes guys a while to get back in shape, right? But with professional wrestling, you have to be in shape almost year round, 24/7, 365, because it's not just that people see you on TV and there's a certain image to upkeep. It's also what you have to do in the ring in terms of those spots, in terms of the movement, the physicality of what you guys do. I mean, I would almost have to think, Ishmael, because you've lived it now in all those sports and now as a professional wrestler, you almost have to be in even better shape than you were as an athlete, because as an athlete, correct me if I'm wrong, when you were playing those sports in college, like football and rugby, you had an off season, but in professional wrestling, there's no off season.
That is correct. In the world of professional wrestling, and that's what people don't understand, and it really irks my nerves, is we don't have an off season. I feel like professional wrestling does not get the respect it deserves. In the NFL, NBA, and all the other sports, like you said, they have an off season. They have 3 months to rest and recover their bodies. In the world of professional wrestling, it goes 365 days of the year. Now, you're not obviously wrestling 365 days, but a lot of us do wrestle at least 200 plus days if you're really trying to get out there and get your name out there. So in terms of that aspect, yes, it's very important to remember that you do need to come in shape and you need to continuously be in shape. It would surprise you at how many people come to wrestling schools not in shape because they don't realize the amount of cardio and conditioning that it takes to be in that ring. Depending on who you're wrestling, you're throwing around 150, 160 to 200 pound body around the ring, and you're also getting bumped yourself. Getting bumped sometimes, depending on the bump, it can knock the wind out of you. And so if you're tired and you're blown in the middle of the ring, you're blown in the middle of your match, and you have to pick up your opponent for a body slam who's trusting you with their body. I am trusting that you are going to put me down safely, but you're too tired to pick up your opponent and you end up dropping it on his head or injuring his neck. Then there's that level of trust that is broken, and is broken because you didn't come in shape or you were too blown in the ring. So I do implore anyone who is thinking about going to a wrestling school, even if it's not Santino Bros, come in shape, not just for yourself, but for your opponent's safety, because we trust each other with each other's bodies. And you never want to have that trust broken. Not in the wrestling world, trust me.
No question. And I think that also falling and taking that bump, as they call it, it's almost like being in a car crash each and every time. It's almost like you're going through something that it's magnified times 10. I mean, I remember as a kid growing up in Brooklyn and we played tackle football on the ground, and it was like, I remember getting slammed to the ground, and I think that's times 10 compared to as a kid, you played football on the field. So you can certainly appreciate and relate to that then. So it brings me then to what I'm sure a lot of people want to hear from in terms of your experiences, my friend, Mr. Vaughn, in terms of the Nightmare Factory. I mean, we always hear about the Nightmare Factory on AEW TV, and we always hear about it all across social media. So talk to me about that experience in the Nightmare Factory before we get into your first match here.
Yeah, so my experience at the Nightmare Factory, I ended up going with one of the people that I trained with at Santino Bros. We're really close. We're actually tag team partners when we do tag. His ring name is Kid Bandit, and he hit me up and was like, "Hey, Ish, did you know Cody and QT run a school in Georgia?" And I was like, "No, I had no idea." I was like, "What's it called?" And he was like, "The Nightmare Factory." So I looked it up, and I was like, "Oh, this is like legit." They have like a full weightlifting facility that's dedicated towards just weightlifting only. You have a strength and conditioning coach who you work with 4 times a week. You have your own nutritionist who you work with every single day if you have meal plan directives. Everyone had a meal plan at the factory, but if you had more assistance that you needed, you had that available to you. So we flew out to Atlanta, Georgia, I want to say April 4th, and we started our first day April 5th. Having the opportunity to go out there and work with QT and Cody Rhodes was tremendously helpful for our career. We not only had the opportunity to work with them, but we had the opportunity to work with Glacier from WCW and learn a lot from him as well. So working at the Nightmare Factory, the way our class were structured is we went Monday through Thursday. We were there for about 4 to 5 hours each day. The first part of our program was in-ring. So Nightmare Factory, something that everyone should know if you're thinking about going there, is they cater towards beginners. So I already had experience going in, and so did my friend Kate Bandit, but it was nice to relearn everything that we had previously learned at Santino Bros, because since COVID had hit California so hard, Joe and I have been out the ring for almost over a year at this point. So I really appreciated that the Nightmare Factory started from the ground up, from just basic roles. But it is very hard because not only is it a 4 to 5 hour class, but it's in Georgia. And coming from California, at least I was not equipped or ready to deal with the humidity that came with Georgia. So not only are you working out really hard in the ring, doing drills and everything, but you got to deal with the humidity. But it was very fun. Eventually you do adapt to it. And then having the opportunity to work with QT and Cody, QT really focused on our in-ring training with us. Cody would show up every now and then and help out with the in-ring training, but I would say that was mainly QT's responsibility. He would show up, he would work with us. QT pretty much told us to treat this as pro wrestling Disneyland, and that's pretty much what it was. I remember a lot of the days he would come in for class and be like, "Hey, so what do you guys want to work on today? Does anyone want to learn a certain move that you don't know how to do?" And so we would all get in the ring and we would just name things that we wanted to work on, and he would allow us to work on it. He would implement them in spots. He would implement them in drills. That was really the main thing that he worked on with us, was just the in-ring portion of it. I would say Cody, he really helped out with promos. That was Cody's thing. Cody's really good at promos, so he took charge of that. During the time I was at the Nightmare Factory, we had about 5 different promo sessions with Cody. A couple of them were singles promos and a couple of them were tag team promos. And the advice that Cody gave was always very outstanding and very great. I remember one thing that he told me during a promo that I cut in front of him is he said, a lot of wrestlers always say "you see," the quote "you see," but not a lot of them really take the time out to let that settle and sit and really make the audience see what they're talking about. A lot of people just use "you see" as a transitional line to get to the next thing that they're going to say in their promo. I remember one of the things that really stuck with me is it was like, if you ever say "you see," let it sit, let it sink, let your facial expressions tell that story, let your eyes really like see it, and the audience will see it as well. So Cody was really helpful when it came to the promos. QT was also in the promos as well, but I feel like Cody took more charge of the promos and QT took more charge of the ring time. So that's my experience at the Nightmare Factory, working between the 2 different coaches. And then Glacier was there to always help out as well. And then we also had a couple of AEW members come in and help coach our classes. We had a few of the Dark Order members come in and help out, number 10 and number 5. And then Baron Black also helped out with our class very often too. So just having the opportunity to work with people who were already where you eventually want to be in the business and learn from them always helped our game. I would say at the Nightmare Factory, you learn how to wrestle, but you really learn how to let your character come alive. And I felt like that's where Ishmael Vaughn was born, was at the Nightmare Factory. Yeah, I came in with the ring name Ishmael Vaughn already, but I really didn't know where I wanted my character to go or where I wanted my character to be until I started doing the promo classes with Cody and started really just working on that at the Nightmare Factory because they push character a lot.
Let me ask you a question when it comes to Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall, because you're talking about two of the premier wrestlers in the world, and obviously Cody Rhodes and his name Rhodes. I mean, you think about the Rhodes family in professional wrestling over the last almost 50 years, right? Between Dusty, Dustin, and Cody. And obviously do want to acknowledge Glacier, because I do have to say, Ishmael, I was a WCW fan growing up, and he was certainly a part of my childhood, whether it was WCW Worldwide, WCW Saturday Night, of course, WCW Thunder and Nitro. And Glacier was definitely a very interesting character, to say the least. And I know that over the past several years, he's kind of got a little bit of a rebirth because the next generation has been able to relive some of those matches. But when it comes to especially a Cody Rhodes and a QT Marshall, when you're up there speaking with these guys and asking them questions, I mean, I know you've been a successful athlete. I know you've won. I know you've been on the gridiron. I know you've been in the rugby scene, but are you nervous when you're speaking to them? I mean, what are you asking them? I mean, are you trying to ask them too many questions? I mean, what's going on through your mind when you're stepping and standing toe to toe next to guys like Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall, who are massive superstars?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I remember the first time me and my friend Joe, we walked through the Nightmare Factory. The very first time we walked through, QT was there with Camarado and they held open the door for us. And I was like, Joe, just say thank you and just keep walking because we don't want to say anything that will make us look bad. And then we kept walking to the gym and Cody was working out. And I was like, oh my God, there's Cody Rhodes. Don't look, just keep going straight. I was like, in my head, I was like, don't be a mark. Just keep walking straight and take your seat. So I remember doing that and then having the opportunity to actually talk to them. So the first day, all the coaches obviously introduced themselves. Cody and QT, they're very down to earth people. Even though they're very high up there in the professional wrestling world and they're celebrities within our world, they're super down to earth people. Sometimes you forget that you're talking to Cody Rhodes and you're talking to QT just because of how relatable they are as people. I remember the first time I ever had to cut a promo in front of Cody, I was nervous going in. I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting ready to cut a promo in front of Cody Rhodes. I cannot screw this up. But I remember walking in that room and he was like, hey, Ish, how are you doing? He really made me feel comfortable and settle in the environment. And just his presence and the way he carries himself and his demeanor, it calms you down. It's like, yeah, you know you're doing a promo in front of Cody Rhodes, but he has such a chill vibe that it makes you chill out. Any anxiousness, any nerves you had, they're gone. And then QT, he's a down-to-earth person. You can talk to him about anything and he'll give you a straight up answer. He won't jerk you around. So they're really cool people to talk to. And yeah, when you're first meeting them for the first time, it's like QT Marshall and Cody Rhodes, like, oh my God, here we are. But when you really talk to them, they're just like everyday people, just like you and me. Yes, they're high up in the celebrity world and the world of professional wrestling, but that's not how they act. They don't carry themselves like that. They carry themselves like a normal person, and it really makes them easy to talk to and easy to relate to.
I think that that's important because I have a background in politics, and I remember working for politicians, and a couple of them held office, and there was one that I worked with on a day-in-and-day basis, and you could tell that people can come across who have a certain status, and they can come across as phony. They can come across as bullshitters, and I think it's important that you learn from people like Cody and QT that weren't like that, weren't arrogant, weren't cocky, because they very easily could be that, and they have every reason and every right to do that because they've had success on the biggest stage and they've had success that very few people have had, and then leads me then to the match that I've gotten to be able to see, and it's one of your first matches against JDX, and we've talked about now all the stuff that you've went through to be able to get you to this journey to where you are today. So talk to me about what's going on through your mind in this match in JDX, and how much have you watched this match since it's been on YouTube?
Yeah, so a match with JDX, it meant a lot to me. That was my debut match. That was my first match ever in the world of professional wrestling that was not considered a training match. And I just remember going on right before. I was very nervous because it's my first match ever. And I was really just trying to make sure that I had our match down and knew everything that was going to go down and everything I was supposed to do. It was funny, actually, because I remember I was just stressing out super hard. And every single person for the showcase at the Nightmare Factory, we had a coach assigned to our match. And our coach assigned to our match was Baron Black from AEW. He's been on Dark multiple times. And he was was our coach between JDX and I. And I remember he showed up about an hour before our match and he was like, all right, tell me what you guys got. So we went over our match with him and he was like, okay, we're going to scratch a few things. And I was like, in my head, I started to freak out because I was like, oh my God, he's about to change things in this match and we go on an hour. So I was like, okay, what you got? So he changed a few things. JX and I went over them and I was just trying to make sure that I knew everything that was going to go down and everything I was supposed to do. I was like, this is your first match. Do not screw it up. And then I remember my friend Kid Bandit, who went to the camp with me, his match was right before mine. So I remember hearing his music hit after he completed his match. And I was like, okay, you're next. And in my entrance, I had valets with me. And I remember getting ready to go into Gorilla and I was like, where are my valets? My music was probably going to hit in probably 30 seconds to a minute and I couldn't find my valets. So I was freaking out over that. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to change my whole entrance. Eventually they came, but that was really stressful. That was just a funny part in the whole story is me stressing out over where the valets are at. But I remember leading up to that match, I was pretty stressed because I wanted everything to go perfect. I wanted my gear to look the best it could. I wanted to perform at the best I could. And I know JDX, he's a top guy on the indies. He's really good. I was honored to have him as my very first opponent. I couldn't have picked anybody else better for me to have my first match against. We definitely brought the intensity. I'm very excited for everyone to see this debut match. I think it's going to blow people out the water. JDX and I tore the house down, and a lot is credited to him because he was wrestling me in my debut. So this is my first wrestling match. And I just respect him for having the ability to go into that match and just work with someone who's completely new to the industry on such a big stage. Because the Nightmare Factory Showcase, it isn't seen live, but once it does air, it's seen by at least 150,000 plus people based on the last two showcases. So we wanted to make sure everything went down perfectly as it could. And he was a great opponent, great first opponent. I could not have picked anybody else better. Now, after that match was done, it was so hot and so humid within that facility. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. As soon as that match was over, I was blown. Probably the worst blown I have ever been in my whole entire life. But I did not show it on camera. I waited till I got backstage. But I was dead. But once I overcame my tiredness, I really sat there and I was like, you really just did that. After everything, I kind of cried a little bit to myself because I was like, you've been through a lot to get to this point. I feel like my wrestling journey, it started in 2018, or actually it started in 2017 when I was training for my WWE tryout. And like 3.5 years later, you finally made your debut. There was a lot of things that went against me that made it really hard to get to that point, whether it was COVID, whether it was school, whether it was trying to hold down a job while training. There was a point during the COVID period where I'm not going to lie, I've never really told anybody this, but I was thinking about giving up wrestling because I was like, is this really going to work out in the world that is going down right now with COVID-19? But there was something within me that told me not to give up and that this is what I was meant to do. And finally making that debut. And once my match was over, I was like, you did it. You didn't give up. You went out there. You had a killer match. You debuted with the Nightmare Factory. You did everything you were supposed to do. You did everything right. And you just got your reward. I was very proud of myself and how far I came to get to that moment in my career, even though it was literally just starting. It took a lot to get to that debut.
In an old quote that Jimmy Valvano, the legendary North Carolina State basketball coach, said with one of his last speeches, and I believe it was his actually last one televised for the ESPYs back in 1993. And he said, don't ever give up. And clearly Ishmael Vaughn didn't give up. And he had a lot of obstacles. He's had a lot of roadblocks, but this is why a rising tide lifts all boats. And this is why we know that everybody needs to follow him on Instagram at the Independent Variable. They need to follow him also on Twitter at HRLIHIN8GTAM and find out why he is somebody that is going to make the Nightmare Factory proud, the Santino Bros proud, and most importantly, everybody here listening to this as we have a few more minutes with Ishmael Vaughn, pro wrestling star, who is on his way to bigger and better things. And Ishmael, before I ask you about your goals for 2021 and maybe a thing or two upcoming in terms of what you're working on, I got to bring her up because obviously we mentioned her at the top, and that's Lariette Amari. And obviously she was a big part of us connecting. And she's obviously somebody I've gotten to know here quite a bit over the past few weeks through some family connections. So for our worldwide audience listening here on Sportnarian, because I know she's going to be listening to this, you got to give me a Lariette story or two, or talk to me about what she's meant to you.
Yeah, Lariette is a really good friend of mine. We both worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I had met Lariette there. Now, the first time I had ever met Lariette, just for a brief moment, I was new to Enterprise. This was during the COVID pandemic where I was working at Enterprise, and Lariette, I met her because she was giving me my car that I was supposed to take down to training. And so she had hooked it up for me, actually, because they were supposed to give me like a really small car. And as you see, I'm like 6'4", 255 pounds. I can't fit in I think they were going to give me like a Toyota Corolla or something like that. I would have been squished in it. She was like, "No, I'm not going to do you dirty like that." And she gave me like a Camry, something a little bit bigger where I could be comfortable in. So I remember that was my very first interaction with Lariette. I didn't talk to her for a very long time after that because she worked at a completely different branch. But eventually during the COVID area, both Lariette and I ended up working at the same branch in Lancaster, California. And Lariette and I were carpool buddies. I remember my boss hit me up and was like, "Hey, you might have met her once, but her name is Lariette. She doesn't have a car right now or a reliable car. Can you pick her up on your way to Lancaster since you guys are both going to be working at that branch?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's no problem." I remember her from my orientation. So I picked up Lariette. Lariette and I became close just through having to commute to Lancaster. That commute for us was about like an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending upon traffic. So we had a lot of time to talk and a lot of time to get to know each other. She shared with me her dreams and her passions about music and what her family is doing with that right now. I shared with her my dreams and passions about becoming a professional wrestler. We're both goal-oriented people and both hard workers, so we were able to relate on that level. And just having fun times working together in Lancaster with the crew that we had with Enterprise Rent-A-Car, that's how we got to know each other a lot better. And then obviously we're really good friends now. We hang out a lot outside of work. And yeah, that's how I met Lariette. It's just through work and having the opportunity to work at the same branch with her. Eventually, when we were both transferred back to the area that we lived in, we worked at the same branch for several more months before she left. And even after she left, we were really good friends.
Not surprised one bit on any of that. And I want to give her a huge shout out. And I want everybody to follow her on Instagram and Twitter. You can do that at Lariette, Emaari. And also Holla Entertainment. I want everybody to follow them on Instagram as well at Holla, Halaent. And I want to recognize, obviously, her family for all the great things that they have done for us, obviously, in connecting with you. And most importantly, follow them again on Instagram and Twitter. And that leads me then to obviously 2021. We know, Ishmael, you've achieved the goal, you've achieved the dream. You're a professional wrestler now. You've had a match or two under your belt. So I got to ask you then, what are your goals for 2021?
Yeah, my goals for 2021 is just to get as many bookings as I can on the independent wrestling scene, get my name out there. One of the things that QT told us leaving the Nightmare Factories, he was like, "All right, you guys are trained down." He was like, "The one thing I ask you guys to do is go out there in the professional wrestling world, use our name, get booked, tell them where you were trained, tell them you were trained by QT and Cody Rhodes, and go out there and make us proud. Get bookings, build yourself a name, get out there, and be someone that we want to sign in the future." Just because you were at the Nightmare Factory doesn't mean that's your easy ticket to AEW or wherever you want to go. You have to go out there and prove to us that you're willing to put in the work, that you're willing to go out there and make a name for yourselves and be someone who we want to sign. So that's exactly what I want to do. I want to go out there. I want to take bookings. I want to work for different promotions all over the country. I want my name to be out there on the indie scene, and eventually one day I want to get signed. That's my goal right now. But as far as 2021 goes, taking as many bookings as I can and getting my name out there and making a positive image for myself, and not only for myself, but the places that I come from: Oakland, California, Cameroon, the Nightmare Factory, Santino Bros. I just want to carry myself in a positive light, because when I go out there and I take these bookings, I don't just represent myself, but I represent Santino Bros and I represent the Nightmare Factory. And at the end of the day, I just want to do them proud. I want to do my family proud, and I want to do myself proud as well. So those are my goals for 2021.
Oh, I'm sure that you'll make a lot of people proud, and you'll go on to do bigger and better things. And I'm sure eventually you'll beat Roman Reigns at WrestleMania next year, and you'll hold the SmackDown Universal title, and you'll go on to do many, many great things, and you'll be a huge superstar, and we'll see you out there, I'm sure, in TV and movies and everything else. But I want to ask you a question before I get closing thoughts and anything else, because you said a couple of things there about what QT said. And he said, yeah, use my name. Don't worry about it. Make us proud. And he said, please tell everybody where you came from. And I want to get your perspective on that, because again, I come from a background where in some senses it would almost be like, oh, you were with this person, and almost like people get taken back. But he actually went out and said, yes, use the Nightmare Factory, use my name. I mean, what does that mean to you on a personal level, knowing that here's a guy that, again, massive success. You see him daily. He's a superstar. He's on TV each and every week. He's a huge part of AEW. That he goes out and actually tells you, yes, Ishmael, use my name. Go out there and say that you're a part of the Nightmare Factory. I mean, what does that make you feel on a personal level?
Yeah, honestly, it makes me feel great. And I'm sure it made a lot of my classmates feel great as well, that they're giving us that level of trust. Because like you said, QT, Marshall, and Cody Rhodes, they're huge names. Everyone in the wrestling world knows who they are. So the fact that they're giving us permission to go out there and use their name and say, hey, yes, we were trained here at the factory by Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall means a lot. And it's something that you don't want to take for granted, because when you go out there and you take bookings, you're representing them. If you're using their name to get bookings, then people are going to know, oh, this kid right here was trained at the Nightmare Factory by Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall. Let's see what he got. But not only let's see what he has, but let's see how he carries himself. Let's see how he acts. Let's see how professional he is. So it's a huge level of trust that I appreciate. And it's something that I don't take for granted, because if I gave someone permission to use my name and I was at the level that they were at, I would expect the exact same thing. Like, hey guys, go out there, get bookings, use my name. But I would expect when my students do that, that they carry themselves in a certain light, in a certain manner, that they carry themselves with respect, dignity, and that they're well trained. And since they're using or allowing us to use their name to do that, I'm guaranteed that that's what they expect from us. And it's a huge level of trust, and it's something that I appreciate that they've given to us. And it's something that I don't take for granted. When I tell bookers that I was trained by Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall at the Nightmare Factory, and even Santino Bros as well, it's something that I never take for granted, because I am not only a representation of myself, but I am a representation of the schools that I come from, the schools that have trained me. So I do appreciate that. And it's something that I won't take for granted when I use their name.
I am sure that you won't take it for granted. And I'm sure that QT Marshall is going to be very proud of you. I am sure that all of your colleagues are going to be proud of you. I am sure that a lot of people in the professional wrestling world are going to know your name in the near and distant future if they haven't already. And these are reasons why we've been very honored to have the opportunity. And we get the first crack, the first shot at speaking with Ishmael Vaughn, pro wrestling star. And we know he's on his way to bigger and better things. And we're very honored to have had the opportunity to speak with him here and get a little insight on who he is and the person that he's become. He's got a very, very interesting background, and I think it's going to translate very well here in the professional wrestling world in the coming weeks, months, and years. And for you, my friend, it's been a tremendous honor to speak with you. And I want to give you the floor. I want to give you any closing thoughts. I know that we've plugged your social media, but I'd like you to plug that and anything else that we haven't plugged. And obviously that includes Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, anything else that's out there. If you like to plug, you're definitely more than welcome to. Anything you want to say to many of your fans out there, family, friends, supporters, anything else you want to address or anybody you want to address to, please do. And I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to speak with you. So I turn the floor over to you. Please plug all of your social media, any social media that we haven't plugged, and anything else you want to say. Be my guest, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, of course. There's a lot of thank yous to go around, a lot. But just the people off the top of my head, of course, first and foremost, I want to thank my mom for getting me to the point to where I am. She raised me as a single parent, and she had to go through a lot with me. I was not an easy kid to raise. So I just want to thank her for never giving up on me and always pushing me to be the best that I can be. I want to thank the family members who have supported me through this journey as well. I want to thank all my coaches, all my trainers. I want to thank my personal trainer back at home, Raymond King. He was the one who prepared me to be in shape for the WWE tryout. He worked with me for over a year, and I wouldn't be where I'm at physically if it wasn't for him. One thing I do want to say for all the people who are thinking about going out there and joining the professional professional wrestling world, if it's something that you want to do, I encourage you to do it. But I also very encourage you to come in with an open mindset, be coachable, come in shape, be ready to take constructive criticism. But if this is something that you want to do, it is a tough industry. It is not easy. There's a lot of good days in this industry and there's a lot of bad days, and you'll probably have an even amount of both. But if this is something that you're really passionate about, something that you really care about, I encourage you to do it, because there's nothing like stepping in that ring. I remember the first time stepping between the ropes. It's nothing like it. The ring is basically where we do our work, is where we make our living. Always respect it and never take it for granted, because as easily as it's been given, it could be taken away just as easily. So that's definitely one thing that I want to translate. And then lastly, I just want to thank the Vaughn family for having me in their household for the past several years and allowing me to chase and pursue my dream. Thank you to Larry Ebb for putting me in contact with you, Thomas. I do appreciate it. It has been a great time on here. If you are interested in following me, as Thomas said, I am on Instagram under D Independent Variable, D with 2 E's. And I'm on Facebook as Ishmael Vaughn. I'm on Instagram as well. And again, thank you, Thomas, for having me on here. I appreciate your time. I know you're truly busy. I just appreciate you taking the time out to do this interview.
Oh, listen, my friend, the pleasure is all mine. And listen, we're never not too busy to speak with you. And I have a feeling anytime you ever want to come on, we'll be happy to speak with you. Anything that's on your mind, the world of professional wrestling, or anything else you have to get on your chest. You got matches coming up, we'll be happy to preview them, or whatever else we can do for you. And I'm sure there are a few other shows here in the Sportnarium Radio family like the Sit Down Marks, who I want to plug here also. And you can catch them on Instagram and Twitter at Sit Down Marks, Facebook as well. Also want to acknowledge the Rewind Wrestling Podcast. I also want to acknowledge the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. And I want to acknowledge a few other wrestling companies that might be listening to this, like Odyssey Pro Wrestling and KOW, which is Knockout Wrestling, the LWF, all over in England. So I am sure a lot of people will know your name. So the pleasure is all mine, my friend. And congratulations on all the success. I'm looking forward to watching you in the ring here in the near and distant future. And keep up the good work. And remember, a rising tide always lifts all boats. And I have a very good feeling you are going to be a rising tide that is going to lift many boats in the near and distant future. And keep up the good work. Go get them out there, and we'll speak with you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks again for having me on.
As we're here on the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show with pro wrestling star and graduate from the Nightmare Factory and the Santino Brothers Academy. That's Ishmael Vaughn. As I am the host of the Sports Report and the station manager here of Sportnarium Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryce. And stay tuned for more hard-hitting analysis here on Sportnarium Radio, as we were just with pro wrestling star Ishmael Vaughn, who recently completed his first match in the ring against JDX and has also been trained by the Nightmare Factory and the Santino Brothers Academy. He was also a 2-time rugby champion with UC Davis. So stay tuned for more hard-hitting analysis here on Sportnarium Radio. I am the host of the Sports Report, the #1 global sports show, and the station manager here of Sportnarium Radio, the Reverend Tom Bryce.